Okay, so it's 7 o'clock. So I'm going to suggest we start the meeting since you've joined us on time. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ian. I'm part of an independent facilitation team called Sworn Inc. that's working with the city and Create TO to support their engagement work about Housing Now, including 405 Sherbourne. Our team's role is really to help facilitate discussion and to connect engagement to decision making. So we are not here to advocate for any outcome in particular. Our job really is to help facilitate the discussion, take lots of detailed notes, and make sure that the feedback that you share is part of Create TO and the City of Toronto's thinking as it continues to move forward with its development concept and proposal for 405 Sherbourne. I'm going to turn it over in a moment to Councillor Wong Tam, but before I do, I wanted to share a land acknowledgement. I'm honored to give this land acknowledgement on behalf of the city and Create TO today. It is one way that settler descendants and non-Indigenous Canadians can offer our proper respect as allies and supporters of Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island. I was born and I grew up in the city in Toronto, and both my parents were born in Southern Ontario. Their heritage goes back to Poland on one side and Scotland and Italy on another. And this acknowledgement really helps remind me and hopefully helps remind all of us to be mindful of the treaties that are still in place and the people that lived here long before us. The 405 Sherbourne lands, which are the focus of this meeting, are covered by Treaty 13. And the lands are the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. So we know that Toronto today is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and I encourage you wherever you are to learn about and acknowledge the traditional territory that you're in, the treaties that are signed there, and the people who are important there. So that's it. I'm going to review the agenda in a moment, but first, Councillor Wong Tam, I'd like to turn it over to you just to say some welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you to all of you who have taken some time to join us this evening. We're really looking forward to this discussion, and I'll tell you that it's not often and every day that we get to center an application at the City of Toronto with a public purpose, and that's really what's driving this particular application. The one that you're going to see and learn about very shortly is, of course, the site known as the Green Pea Park on Sherbourne. You know the site very well. It has been there for a very long time, and I know that for many of you who live and work and study in the neighborhood, there's probably been at some point in time several questions in your head. Is like, what is the city going to do with this site? And gosh darn it, there are so many condominiums being built all over the downtown core. Why won't the city build more affordable housing? Which is why I'm very pleased to say that this particular site will have affordable housing, will have a component of mixed-use housing, and of course, some community space. So the application is going to be very different, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time to tune in today, and really to also acknowledge that this is the beginning of the application process, but one that is critically important because this is not an application that's going to be driven with solely a commercial outcome, meaning that you have a conventional developer here to extract maximum profit. The city is not in the business of building for market profit housing. The city is really trying to grapple with the housing crisis as we know it. And this particular application at 405 Sherbourne, I believe and I hope, is going to set a whole new standard with respect to what type of development is suitable, what is sustainable, how do we respect the existing street wall and the street scape, but also recognizing that the area has really rich, incredible heritage attributes. And we should not look at 405 Sherbourne without looking at all four elevations of the street, including the fact that on Bleecker, you have a very different type of building topology, and we need to be respectful to every single elevation where this building will sit. So we should build something that is beautiful, that is transformative, that is community interest and driven, and anything short of that, because this is a city initiated project, we should reject. So we have to demand more of ourselves simply because this is a city application. And I'm very happy that the team that's been assembled here is here to explain in great detail what this all means and to show you for the very first time what these images, very conceptual, will result in hopefully a bigger, beautiful transformation and a very positive attribute to the community. And I, of course, will look forward to hearing all your comments as I stay with you for the rest of the meeting. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Councillor Wong-Tam. So we're just going to put the agenda on screen, and I know there's a couple of folks on the phone as well, so I'll describe it in case you're joining us that way. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is to introduce the Housing Now initiative to those of you. Some of you may know about it already and some might not. So we want to give you a bit of an overview of the initiative, and we want to present and seek some feedback on the preliminary development concept for 405 Sherbourne Street. So right as soon as we're finished with this overview, the City and Create TO are going to give a presentation along with SVN, and we'll introduce the people from the team in a moment. They're going to present for about 30-35 minutes. It's a detailed presentation that gives some of the background and thinking about the site. And then what we want to do for the remainder of our time is hear both any questions that you might have about what you saw in the presentation, as well as your feedback. So we have a discussion in 3 parts really, which is we want to hear your thoughts on the types of public realm features, whether those are tree planting, walkways, or street furniture, that type of thing that you would like to see around the building. If you have any suggestions on how to best reflect the characteristics of the neighborhood and the surrounding buildings. And third, if you have any thoughts on the types of community agency space that you would like to see in the building that would benefit the local community. And of course, if there's any other advice that you'd like to share, we're very open to hearing that as well. We will wrap up by 8:55 at the latest and talk about next steps then at that point. So that's it in terms of the agenda. I'll review who's with us. So from Create TO, we have Chantel. Maybe Chantel can just give a wave. And then from City Planning, we have Annalie and Tom. From the city's Housing Secretariat, we have Valessa, who is not on screen yet, but will be. And then we also have from SVN, Sunny and Audrey. They're the consultants to the City and Create TO who have been helping with the development concept. So that's those, and that's just the people that are on camera. We also have at least as many, if not more, who are off camera, but who will be part of the discussion a little bit later. So this is just the team that's going to be going over the presentation. A few final words from me in terms of mechanics, and then I'll turn it over to Annalie for the presentation. So you might have noticed that there's a recording dot that's on your screen. We are recording the meeting because it's a public meeting. We record the meetings, and Create TO will be putting a recording of this discussion on their website after. So just wanted to let everybody know that. Our facilitation team is also going to be taking detailed notes and preparing a summary of this discussion. So if you know someone who might be interested in the topic of this, but might not have an hour or two to watch the video afterwards, we will prepare a short summary so they can catch up on what happened that way as well. My final thing in terms of mechanics is that after the presentation, we will make all the participants, all of you that have joined, panelists. So what that means in terms of WebEx is that you will have the ability to turn on your camera and your mic. I'm not going to touch your camera. No one's going to turn your camera on. Yeah, that is totally up to you to turn your camera on. And I'll ask everyone to stay muted on microphone, but I'm also not going to mess with anyone's microphone unless I hear a dog barking in the background or something and have to mute somebody. But really, we're here to help if we need to, but we're not going to manage things unless it's really necessary to help someone with the technology. So that's it in terms of me for the overview and the mechanics. Annalie, maybe I'll just turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, you can advance the slide then, please. Well, welcome to the presentation. Ian has just gone over a little bit about what our agenda is for the evening, and we look forward to sharing with you, of course, the preliminary development concept for 405 Sherbourne. But prior to that, we thought we would pick up on what Councillor Wong-Tam shared about the Housing Now initiative and some planning requirements. Next. So a little bit about our project team. Again, as Councillor Wong Tam noted, this is a rather unique development in the City of Toronto. It's jointly managed by Create TO, the city's real estate agency, and the City of Toronto. So I'll very quickly share with you what that means and why this is different than, say, a developer coming in with a development proposal for a new project. The Housing Secretariat is the corporate lead for the Housing Now initiative and is the lead as well in approving the target for new affordable units on these sites. City planning is the lead in updating the planning frameworks that then enable these projects to come to fruition. So that includes everything from the community consultation to reviewing what the ultimate zoning bylaw will be that goes before council. Create TO in the context of Housing Now partners with the city's Housing Secretariat and the City Planning Division to manage the overall project, but then takes it to the next step in bringing it forward to market to find a developer partner to bring this project to reality. Next. So just a little bit about Housing Now. Housing Now is an initiative launched by Mayor Tory and approved by City Council back in 2018. And a key component of that is to use city-owned land to accelerate the development of affordable housing. That looks at public land and how we can maximize that for public benefits. So affordable housing is central to that objective, but we also, where appropriate, look for where we can incorporate new community facilities and on larger sites, parkland, and in every site, improvements to the overall public realm. All of the projects are mixed income developments, and they are supportive of complete communities in the area in which they're located. We also undertake enhanced consultation. So we're with you tonight. We'll be with you again in 2021, and there will be a statutory meeting for the ultimate zoning bylaw in 2021 as well. Next. And just to give a little bit of a background on what we mean when we say affordable housing on these sites, this slide is an image of the continuum of affordability of housing, ranging from emergency shelters all the way to market home ownership. What the slide does is highlights the elements and the affordability levels and types of management and tenure that the Housing Now program will be supporting. So here we're looking at affordable rental housing and market rental housing on this site. Affordable rental housing in this context means housing that is managed by the ultimate tenant of the site, who will be leasing the land from the city for 99 years to provide affordable rental housing and the component of market rental housing. Next. I wanted also to give you a sense of how broad the program is. 405 Sherbourne is on that map, just above the T in Toronto, the second T. But you'll see we have sites all over the city, from Etobicoke, North York, Scarborough, Midtown, Queen Street East, and the railway lands. And they range in size and type of building. We have some sites that are large enough to incorporate new public streets and multiple blocks of housing. And then we have sites like at 405 Sherbourne, where we're looking to develop a building that works very well with its context and supports the need for affordable housing. Next. And about affordability, these are some examples of people who are crucial to making City of Toronto the city that it is today. Are people working on our front lines, people working in our construction industry, or retired persons. And you have a sense of what the median annual income is from the slide for each of those individuals. So based on the type of housing that they need and where they can find housing, people with these income ranges are spending between 37% and 80% of their income on their housing needs, which meets no standard of affordability. So that is a target of the Housing Now program, to provide rents that support people in that income bracket. Next. I'm going to pass it over to Chantal for a little bit about the housing targets and broader objectives.
Thank you, Annalie. So our main objective, as Annalie noted, is to create affordable, inclusive developments that support the creation of complete communities. So that's all done while prioritizing design excellence. So we look to maximize the number of affordable units. Here we are targeting 50% affordability, and we're also ensuring that the design is compatible to the build form and character, and the pedestrian scale of the area is protected. We're also meeting the council directions on accessibility targets for affordable and market units, and including the fully barrier-free common areas. And we also look to encourage universal design approaches in the proposals that we received from our development partners through the market offering process. On a more specific level, the key objectives for 405 Sherbourne relate to conducting early engagement within the community and with the community agencies, and ensuring that that consultation happens throughout the process, as Annalie noted, and very early on in the process. So the preliminary development concept is informed by the feedback received prior to our first zoning submission. We're also looking to enhance the existing public realm while maintaining the important mid-block connections that exist on the site today, and providing publicly accessible open spaces as well. With respect to heritage, the site is within the Cabbagetown Northwest Heritage Conservation District. And so the proposed build form will be in line with the HCD guidelines and will appropriately respond to the adjacencies and character of the Heritage Conservation District. We will also be engaging with the nonprofit in the management of the affordable units. And with respect to community services and facilities, we are looking to incorporate other city building opportunities. So here we are proposing the inclusion of community agency space, and the tenant for that community agency space would be determined by the city's social finance administration division much later on in the process. Next slide. So we are aware that the existing TPA parking lot is well used. And so this development is planned to have one level of underground parking to support the residents within the building. We are exploring whether some spaces in the new development could be managed by a commercial parking operator. We're currently in discussions with TPA, and we'll engage with other commercial parking operators as well to see exactly how this could happen and how much public parking could be provided. But again, this is still being studied. Furthermore, we will be completing a parking study as part of the zoning bylaw application, and that will help us to understand what the existing demand is, who's using the lot regularly, during what periods, and why. And ultimately, this will help to inform whether or not maintaining some parking on site is possible. And I do just want to reiterate, I've had some discussions with residents about this earlier this week and last week as well. So I just want to reiterate that we do hear you. We understand there's a need here, and we are doing our best to find an economically feasible solution. Next. So now I'll pass it over to Tom.
Thanks, Chantal. All right, so we'll look at the neighborhood context first, and we see here the site is located at a convergence of many different neighborhoods. It's on the edge of Cabbagetown, but I wouldn't say it's really part of the Cabbagetown neighborhood. Really, this block of Sherbourne really has its own distinctive character, but it's not quite a neighborhood on its own. Next. Here's our property map showing the site is located on the east side of Sherbourne Street. And you can see along Sherbourne, there's a whole range of building sizes and orientations and footprints. Next. Here's an aerial photograph showing the site's surface parking lot right now. You can see Winchester Park and Winchester Square Park to the east. And then transit in the area, there's the 506 Carleton streetcar line to the south, bus routes along Sherbourne and Wellesley, and then heading north along Sherbourne, there's Sherbourne Station up at Bloor. Next. Here's a bird's eye view looking north from Carleton. And you can see the context here with 4-story walk-up apartments to the south of the site. There's 3-story houses to the north. And then across the street on the west side of Sherbourne, there's a 10-story apartment building. To the east on Bleecker, there's a 15-story apartment building. And then going a bit further out, you can see all the high-rise towers of St. Jamestown, north of Wellesley, as well as high-rises east of Homewood. Here's a view looking southwest from north of the site. In the foreground, you can see Winchester Park. And it just shows a general transition from a very tall built-up area at the core of the downtown, moving towards Sherbourne, which has some tall buildings, and then further east, it's primarily low-rise. Getting down to street view, here's a view of the site looking north from Sherbourne. And you can just see here, Sherbourne is one lane in each direction, a separated bike lane. There's a lay-by in front of the site, relatively narrow sidewalk in front, and no street trees. And next view here, this is a view standing on the site looking west, and you can see There's a 10-story apartment building, 4-story office building, a couple converted houses, and the entrance to the Phoenix Concert Theater right across the street. Moving over to Bleecker, looking south, these are the Victorian 2-story Victorian houses in the foreground with a site just south. And you can see Bleecker is very narrow, tree-lined, parking on one side, and relatively narrow sidewalk adjacent to the site. And looking north on Bleecker from the south end of the site, you can see a series of curb cuts and driveway accesses that lead into the apartment buildings. And it's notable that there's no consistent street wall on the east side of Bleecker. Getting into the planning framework, first we'll look at the official plan. And the official plan is really a vision for the future of the city. It tells us where we should focus growth and intensification and what areas we should protect from growth. So we see here on the urban structure map that the site is within the downtown, and that is a growth area and a focus of intensification. But that said, growth is contextual. It's not meant to be uniform, and new development really needs to fit into its context of the surrounding buildings. The whole downtown is covered by the downtown plan, which provides further direction for new development. And here is an excerpt from the land use map in the official plan. We see here that the site and all the surrounding lands are all designated apartment neighborhoods, which are considered relatively stable areas, primarily for apartment buildings. Also permitted are small-scale retail, service, and office uses, as well as local institutions, cultural and recreational facilities. And general direction for new development is that it should provide transition between areas of different intensity. We should frame streets with good proportion, maintain sunlight for pedestrians on the streets, and provide ground floor uses that enhance safety, amenity, and animation. Now going over to the zoning bylaw, whereas the official plan was a vision for the future, the zoning bylaw is the nuts and bolts details of exactly what is permitted on the site today. And it's not forward-looking. Generally, the zoning bylaw changes through development proposals. Here, the site, you can see it's zoned residential, and that allows for a wide range of building types, including apartment buildings. It also allows for limited community services and retail space. The maximum density has a split zoning, so the west half of the site along Sherbourne has a maximum density of 2.0 times the lot area, like a floor area of 2 times the lot area, and the east half is 1 times the lot area. And on the whole site, the maximum height is 10 meters, or about 3 stories. And then the other key part of the planning framework is the Cabbagetown Northwest Heritage Conservation District. We see here it's within the limits. The lands to the north and south are also within the HCD plan, but the lands to the east and west are not. So the HCD plan has some key policies for new development. Number 1 is it should respect the human scale of the area while enhancing the area's heritage attributes. 2, it should complement the prevailing character of existing heritage buildings. And 3, in areas of varied building height, new development must respect adjacent buildings by being neither excessively higher nor lower. So with that, I'll be turning it over to Sunny from SVN, the architect, who will walk us through the design process for the preliminary concept.
Thank you.
And just before you jump in, Sunny, so we're at about 15 minutes of presentation. We got about 15 to 20 more to go.
Thank you. Oh, Jeff, so this is just looking at the site context again, and really looking at the key objectives of the project. Of course, Chantal mentioned that this is a mix of both affordable and market units. So the project is proposed to be 216 rental units, half of which are affordable rental and half are market rental. Next. These are a series of images of the site. So really looking at historic images from 1890 to present day. And one of the unique things about the site itself is that it has largely not been built on. Some of the older images show the large green space that used to exist as a private space. And as the site evolved into a parking lot, although it's used for parking, it's remained as a relatively public space, allowing for that critical through block connection that was spoken to previously. Looking at the slide from 1890, we can see the townhouse fabric on Bleecker Street shown there to the north of the site. and then the larger house forms along Sherbourne, some of which remain to this day. Next slide. In our analysis of the existing context, one of the unique things about this neighborhood just is the variety and the typology of both the open spaces and the unique types and tenures of housing that frame them. So I'll walk you through some of these key things that we've really taken inspiration from and tried to incorporate it into the built design itself. Next slide. Of course, the three public parks to the east of the site. Next slide. And then some of the hardscape play spaces that are associated with schools within the neighborhood are also something that we really look to incorporate into the design. Next slide. Of course, more intimate community gardens. Next. And then looking at Bleecker Street, again, it's more of an intimate street, largely framed by townhomes with smaller private residential gardens in front. And of course, some of the newer buildings, although larger in scale, set back from the street, minimizing their impact. Next slide. And then looking on Sherbourne Street, again, some of the larger house forms that I mentioned before are still, remnants of them still remain. One of the unique features of these is the large setback with some of the lawns, front lawns still intact. And of course, 4-story walk-up apartments, and then some of the mid-century buildings as well, although larger in scale, set back from the street, minimizing their impact. Next slide. And then, of course, some of the more intimate, semi-private and private courtyards, looking at Bleecker Street Cooperative and the Hugh Gardner Co-op, really creating a unique mix of pathways and pedestrian connections through the site, but also some unique front yards and backyards framing those connections. And then one of the unique things about this site itself, as I mentioned before, is it provides a unique through-block connection. Winchester Street terminates at Winchester Park, but the Bleecker Street Cooperative really provides a nice through connection. You can see the view to the right, number one, lifting up of the building itself, and providing this connection to the park. So what we really wanted to do was really carry on this activity through our site, and then to create that public connection through. So Thomas mentioned the Heritage Conservation Guidelines. So one of the things that we're trying to do is really walk you through how we're trying to respect and complement the existing heritage buildings and really create a human scale transition to the taller elements of the design. And this was largely done with the first 4 stories of the building, or the podium, as we refer to it. So these diagrams will walk you through how we use key features of the existing buildings in the area as datums to really inform the design. So this first slide is really looking at some horizontal datums that we're trying to pick up on from Sherbourne Street to the north of the site, using the larger house forms, which is a series of 3 to the north of the site. And then some of the elements that were used, the key lines are the eaves line and the grand entrance to those house forms. Next slide. And then picking up on the vertical rhythm, some of the unique characters of these buildings is the recessed grand entrance and then the larger bay window. Next slide. To the south of the site on Sherbourne, they're largely the 4-story walk-ups. So you can see a series of 3 of those buildings here. And with this built form, we're trying to pick up the large or the top parapet line or the roof line across, and then also the unique front door entrance. Next slide. And of course, in terms of rhythm, we're really trying to pick up the large block rhythm within our built form. Next slide. So this is an elevation of Sherbourne Street. So really looking towards the left-hand side of the north of the site. The shows the eaves line coming across. So really trying to pick up this datum with the residential building. beginning at the second story. The community space is shown on the ground floor. And then with the front entrance, we're really trying to pick up the main entrances of the lobby, the residential lobby to the north of the site, and then the community space front entrance to the south of the site. And then looking towards the south of the site, we're really trying to pick up on the datum of the entrance and the parapet line at the roof. So really trying to marry the house form and the four-story walk-up across the site. Next slide. And in terms of vertical rhythm, what we're trying to pick up from the house form is that recessed front entrance. So you can see in yellow that's highlighted on the right-hand side, or the left of the image. And then we're picking that up with a recessed front entrance. And then again, with the entranceway to the four-story walk-up, we're using that key feature with the canopy for the entrance to the community space to the south of the site. Next slide. And that's just the elevation without the datum lines. And then you'll be aware of this precedent, a local precedent. So this really looks at how to incorporate contemporary built form that really respects the scale of the existing heritage building. And then of course, it also picks up some of the elements of the landscaping as well. And this is an example of a street frontage of a community space. And really one of the challenges is to make a space that's both open, but then also respecting the privacy of what's happening behind. So the KCS does this quite well, providing glazing at the grade, but really using landscape as an element to help screen what's happening inside. Next slide. This is a view of Sherbourne looking south, so really looking at the house form, clearly showing the datum line of the eaves picked up with where the residential building starts and the community space below, and then the recessed lobby. Next slide. This is looking south again on Sherbourne, but looking at it from the sidewalk. Next slide. And then looking north on Sherbourne, really looking at the block form of the proposed development in relationship to the four-story walk-up. Next slide. And then along the sidewalk, looking north again. On Bleecker Street, we really tried to pick up on the fine grain elements of the townhomes to the north of the site. And so in terms of datum, really the dominant datums that we looked at are the dormer and the eaves, and then of course the unique bay windows. Next slide. And then in terms of vertical rhythm, really it's the bay window, double front door bay window rhythm of those townhomes that we tried to pick up on. Next slide. So again, looking at the datums of the bay window, the eaves, and the dormer. So we tried to match the rhythm. We're proposing townhomes fronting Bleecker Street, looking at some of the same elements. So two-story townhomes, and then a setback for the third and fourth story. And then again, the setback to the tower above. Next slide. And then again, this is just showing the rhythm of the bay windows that we've incorporated into the townhomes, the proposed development. Next slide. And then again, without the datums. Next. And this is looking at a contemporary version of that double bay window, double door townhome frontage. This is on Beverly Street in the city. So looking at incorporating townhomes at the base of a building and really trying to be respectful of the heritage buildings. Next slide. This is a view looking south from Bleecker Street. So really showing the two-story townhomes proposed with a contemporary version of the bay window, and then a larger setback to the third and fourth story, and then a setback again to the tower above. Next slide. And then again on the sidewalk, looking south, and then you can see the bay windows and the two-story townhomes. Next slide. And then looking north, we're really trying to match the four-story with the four-story walk-up. Of course, we've provided for a larger setback and really allowing the townhomes to be the main feature on Bleecker Street. and then again looking north. Next slide. And this is just a series of diagrams really highlighting the key design principles of the project. So really the idea of creating and keeping the through block connection and really enhancing that as a public space, but then also using the through block connection to the north as a means for vehicle access to the site. One of the things we're really aware of is the need for safety on the site. So really allowing views from Bleecker to Sherbourne, and of course animating the ground floor of the building to make sure there's eyes on the street and eyes on the public space as well. Of course, we talked about the built form character along Sherbourne and Bleecker, really respecting the heritage fabric, and then really pushing the tower back into the middle of the site, conforming to the tall building guidelines and really minimizing its impact. And then the creation of what we call the Sherbourne Court and Sherbourne Green, which is really a green and hardscape spaces for public access. And then of course, amenity spaces above. Next slide. And these are aerial views of the development, showing the fine grain of the podium and the 22 stories tower above. Next slide. And then looking at the site plan, this really highlights some of the key setbacks of the development. So the 22-story tower setback 12.5 meters from the north property line, and then 16.1 meters to the south. The 4-story podiums fronting Sherbourne Street, and then of course the 4 stories setback from the north, 5.9 meters, and then to the south 7.4 meters. And then along Bleecker Street, the 2-story townhomes stepping back to 3 and 4 stories. Next slide. And this is just a section through the site, east-west. So this really highlights the large setbacks along Sherbourne Street from the property line at 9 meters, and then the large setback along Bleecker Street at 10 meters from the property line. Next slide. And then the section north-south, really showing the setback from the north property line, conforming to the tall building guidelines. Next slide. And this is just a site plan, so I'll walk you around in terms of programming along the ground floor. Of course, I mentioned along Bleecker Street, a series of townhomes with a double door front entrance, and then also small intimate gardens. As we turn to the south, there's a pedestrian mews with an additional 2 townhomes, really helping to animate that mews condition. And then moving along to the west, lobby, amenity, and bike parking spaces for the development. The community space fronting Sherbourne Street has its entrance recessed towards the south. Moving north along Sherbourne Street is the main lobby entrance. And then I've mentioned before the vehicle access through the site, which really provides access to the entrance to the parking garage and to the garbage loading space. So what we're trying to do is really minimize the impact of these 2 vehicle spaces, ensure that they're not visible from Sherbourne or from Bleecker, and try to bury them deep into the site. We're also providing a lay-by drop-off with the residents. So I'll turn it over to Audrey, who will speak to the landscape components of the project.
So this is just another angle taken elevated view of the site, and you can kind of see the pedestrian and the vehicular circulation, as well as the perimeter of the site with the street trees and sidewalks and the pedestrian walkways. Next slide. So this slide highlights the Sherbourne Green, which is the north extent of the site. As Sunny was mentioning, this is really where we have the vehicular access on site. We have 2 drive aisles, and closer to Sherbourne, we have a vehicular lay-by. The north section of the site is the Sherbourne Green, and this is really meant to be a pedestrian-only linear open space with a walkway and a row of street trees. We have 2 precedents at the top of showing how this space might look and feel. And the middle one is a National Ballet School, and this is to show how this through connection can be very animated with lighting. And of course, the bottom image is the existing context along Sherbourne, showing you this generous setback of both hardscape and softscape lawns. Next slide. So this is the Sherbourne Court, which in contrast is meant to be only pedestrian. And this is on the south side of the building. And this space is really meant to be very flexible, and it's supposed to permit areas for rest and areas to socialize. And the bottom image is, bottom two images is of course, of the National Ballet School in the laneway, and how the space, a very hardscaped open space, can be kept animated and flexible. The top image is the plaza in New York, or a similar scale. Next slide. So with Sherbourne Court, the idea is that through lighting and careful layout of landscape elements, we can keep it very visible year-round. Next slide. And this section is taken on the Sherbourne side, and this is showing the sidewalk next to the existing bike lane and street trees where feasible, and a 2-meter setback adjacent to the community amenity space, which, as Sunny highlighted earlier, could be landscape for privacy. So the top image is Casey House, and the bottom image is another precedent found at Sackville and Dundas in Regent Park. And the bottom is an employment agency, and the top is the hospital. Next slide. So this is the pedestrian muse condition that extends all the way south of our site, south on our site, through from Bleecker side through to Sherbourne side. And again, this bottom section is highlighting the area closer to Bleecker side, out front, in front of the 2 townhomes. What we're proposing is a minimum 4-meter pedestrian muse walkway condition throughout, with a 2-meter private residential setback at this location. And what we were really trying to pick up on was the co-ops in the neighborhood, and the typology of the walkways next to the semi-private and private courtyards. So this section is taken on the Bleecker Street side. Again, we're showing how an infill townhome development can fit in the context of an existing heritage neighborhood. So this is the precedent that Sunny showed earlier. It's 15 Beverly Street. What we're proposing here on our site is street trees with a 2.1-meter city standard sidewalk and a minimum 2-meter residential planting zone with smaller trees and shrubs next to this grade townhome condition. Next slide. So this hand sketch is just to show how the Sherbourne Green on the north side of the site might look like. You can see that with the linear open space on the north side, it's really animated. It's got some street trees, and it's really meant to be a walkway condition, but that people can also stop and take rest on the benches and access the lawns and the tree cover. And the side closer to the building is meant to be more vehicular for access to the loading and to the lobby drop-off. Next slide. So this is a diagram, elevated view of Sherbourne Green, again highlighting the shared street condition where pedestrians and vehicles can just pass through the laneway, as well as a linear green space that's meant to be only pedestrian accessible on the north side of the site. Next slide. So this hand sketch is showing the Sherbourne Court side of the site, which is the south side. And this is meant to be a very hardscaped area that is very flexible in nature as well. It's not only meant to be a mid-block connection, but it's supposed to play host to a range of spontaneous and organized activities and really be animated by community events that could happen here. Next slide. And further to that, this diagram highlights the various activities that could occur here. Could be a place where children can learn to ride their bike. Could be a place where pop-up vendors can interact with the community. Can be a place where people just have spontaneous gatherings. And it's meant to also tie into the bicycle infrastructure, of course, of the Sherbourne existing bike lane, but as well as the bike room in the building. Next slide. I believe, is it Chantel that's walking through the project schedule?
Yeah, thank you, Audrey. Can you flip to the next slide, please? Please, Matthew? Thank you. So following today's meeting, we will be attending the design review panel on November 26th. The feedback that is received today and that will be received at the design review panel will be used to refine the preliminary concept for the site prior to our first zoning submission. And so you can see here that our first zoning submission is targeted for early 2021, and that will be followed by our second community consultation, at which point you will see how your feedback has been incorporated. We are anticipating that we'll have a final zoning bylaw to the Planning and Housing Committee and City Council by the end of spring or early summer of next year. And following that, we will be having our market offering, and then a development partner would be selected and would take the project through the site plan application process where additional consultation will take place. And they'll also be obtaining the necessary building permits and approvals to begin construction, which is anticipated by the spring of 2022, with first occupancy planned for the spring or summer of 2025. Next slide. So today really is the first unveiling of our preliminary development concept. Prior to today's meeting, we did consult with some community agencies and committees on design principles and our site context and what our approach would be. And so what you see here is some of the preliminary feedback that we received from those groups. And it also includes the preliminary feedback that was received through the Create.to website through the feedback forms. We will also be consolidating the feedback that we received today. And so the feedback shown here plus feedback that we received today will be used, as I mentioned, to inform and revise the preliminary development concept that you'll see at the second round of consultations. Next slide.
Great. Thanks, Chantal, and everyone. Matthew, if you could stop sharing the slides. Thanks everyone for the presentation, and to our participants for joining. As I saw as the presentation was going, we did have a couple more people join, so we're coming up on 80 people, which is great. I press a button, we can change what we're all looking at. So first of all, I know there are some people on the phone, and depending on the device that you were using, if you were using a smartphone or a tablet even, not all the slides might have been as visible as possible to you. So I just want to make sure everybody knows in advance that that presentation is going to be shared on the Create.to website. We'll share it a couple times over the course of this meeting, but just so you know, it's createto.ca/405 Sherbourne. So that will be available, and we can also email it out to everybody that logged in with an email address, or at least a link to that website, so you have a chance to see it. We also know from having done these a couple of times that the majority of the time, most of the technology holds up, but from time to time, someone does have an issue with their microphone or their internet connection or something. So just rest assured, this is not the only chance to weigh in on this. We do not want technology to in any way be a barrier to you either asking a question or sharing advice. So if we do go to you and for some reason the audio doesn't work or anything like that, we will make sure that we find a way to connect after the meeting to hear your question and get an answer, or to collect your feedback and make sure that it makes its way into the record. So I did want to preface that just the discussion with those two things, because I know that from time to time someone does have didn't see the slides or was on the phone and didn't see them. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make everyone who is not on the phone you'll have the ability to turn on your camera and your mic. So I'm not going to automatically turn either of those things on. I'll describe what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to do it. I know I've described it a couple times, but this is the last time, and then we'll do it. So I'm going to make everybody a panelist. You'll see a little notice on your device that says that you have that ability, and your camera will be off and your mic will be off. I'd ask you to leave the mic off because we do have a process by which we will go through to answer questions. If you'd like to turn your camera on, we would love it. Just it makes these COVID meetings a little bit more human to be able to see people's faces. But of course, if you want to leave it off, there's of course totally fine to do that as well. So I'm going to do that in a sec, and then we will jump straight into questions. So it might take a second while the software does its thing. Okay, so I'm seeing lots of names pop up, which is good. I'm just going to keep going with a few more. Or I guess everybody that have been able to make a panelist is now a panelist. So this is good, and I see a few more popping up, and I see at least a few faces, which is great. So thank you for doing that, those of you that have opted to turn on your camera. So first of all, we want to see if any of you have any questions. So depending on the device you're using, there's a couple ways to do it, but really you just want to look for the little raise hand button. So either you can, if you're on a tablet, there should be a little face icon. You can just tap that and then press raise hand. If you're on a smartphone, it would look either like a silhouette or an ellipsis. So you can tap on that and then raise hand. And if you're on the desktop app, you have to click, or using WebEx on your computer, there's a little button at the bottom right that says participants. You can click that, and then right above that, there's a tiny little button, like a really tiny button. That's an icon of a hand that you can press. If you're on the phone, you can press *3, and that will put your hand up as well. So those are some ways. And of course, you can always just wave. I will be doing my best to pay attention to everyone's face as well as to the raised hand icon. So I'll start with Stephen because Stephen has got his hand up. So Stephen, do you have we'll do questions for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll jump into feedback. So Stephen, you can unmute yourself, and if you want to ask your question, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Ian. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, perfectly.
Wonderful. So I think I have 3 main questions. My first question is, have you done a shadow study, and who is going to be impacted and to what degree?
Okay.
Also, you did share the example on Beverly Street. I see what they were going for there. I do personally believe that it was an utter failure, especially when you look at the colors of the buildings. They just don't match. It still looked like a modern building dropped next to a heritage building. I'm really hoping that's not something we have happen here. And finally, and most importantly, I want to ask, have the designers actually connected with Toronto Police Services and had a CPTED done on this, or do they plan to? For anyone on the call who doesn't know what that stands for, it's crime prevention through environmental design. So have the police look at the design and say, is there anything here that might increase or harbor the opportunity for crime to happen?
Okay, thanks. So that's 3 questions. First one, maybe we'll start with the shadow study. Have you done a shadow study? So maybe I can start, Annalie, with you or Tom, and then we can go through the other 2.
Thanks, Ian. I think actually, Tom, you are probably able to answer that question with Sunny.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely will require a shadow study as part of a rezoning application. We haven't gone into much detail looking at one yet, but maybe Sunny wants to provide feedback on any initial findings he has from that.
Yeah, just in terms of the shadow impact, the building height was set to create no shadow impact on the park, on Winchester Park. So that's really what we started at in terms of the height.
Okay. So the second question, it wasn't really a question, so maybe I'll just share, which was a piece of advice to avoid the Beverly Street style, because it sounds like Stephen didn't like the color and the way that one landed exactly. So maybe I'll just, because we'll come back to that point maybe in the discussion again, but I know that we really wanted to focus on more questions and feedback, at least for the first couple minutes.
Ian, if I just may, because I think there is a question that we can answer in there. And Stephen, that is a good point. And this is right now, we're looking at the zoning study. So what the size and shape of the building can look like. But there will be another round of consultation for all Housing Now projects at site plan. And site plan is when we'll have the architect who will be designing the building that will go to construction. And they will be able to share ideas around the materials for those buildings with the community. So that is something that we are aware of, how important the materials and the quality of materials are for these buildings. So when we get down to that level of detail, it's absolutely something that we can continue discussing.
Yeah.
And the last question was just about CPTED. So Sunny, maybe have you been thinking about crime prevention through environmental design, or have you connected with the Toronto Police Service about that?
Yeah, we haven't connected with Toronto Police Services, but yeah, that's top of mind for this site in this particular area. And so one of the ways we've tried to make sure that the building is a safe place all around, because we are proposing a number of public accessible spaces, is to really maintain that through block visibility from Bleecker to Sherbourne, and to animate the frontage of the building on all four sides. So the community space frontages, the lobby and amenity spaces, the townhomes, we're all trying to help animate and keep eyes on the street and eyes on the public space.
And I would just say that through the review, I will circulate to the police, and it's a good point. We should get their feedback. So I'll do that.
Yeah, I would hope that we get the feedback sooner than later, because you never want to go back and redesign something after the fact.
Okay, yeah, good point.
Okay, so thanks, Stephen. I'm going to go to the next couple of people. So Stephen, if you wouldn't mind doing like the lower hand, just so I know if you put your hand up again later, so I can come back to you if necessary. And I'll remind the people on the phone to put up your hand. You just press *3. I'll check in on the folks on the phone from time to time, but that's how you put your hand up there. So I'm going to queue up the next couple of people just so you know who's coming. I've got Kat, Mark, and Miriam. So Kat, we'll start with you. Do you have a question for the team?
Hi, yeah. So I was just wondering what your plan is for outdoor amenity space and what's being proposed for like parks or dog walks area in there, and what you have proposed for appropriate soil volume for the area. Just because with COVID going on, the use of green space has doubled by 100%, if not more, with just community use. And I was just wondering if you had any answers for that.
Sure, that's probably an Audrey Sunny question. If you want to elaborate a little bit on the outdoor space, if there's space for dogs and how you're thinking about soil volume, Audrey?
Sure, yeah. We've already taken a look at, just because we're both landscape and architectural at SVN, we've already taken a look at on a preliminary level of achieving soil volume. So we're not proposing trees anywhere where it's not feasible. And in terms of outdoor amenity space, we haven't gone into too much detail in terms of designing those spaces yet, but we have accounted for them, and there are certain Toronto Green standards we have to meet. So we will be, as we proceed with the development, we will be designing those spaces more and more.
Yeah, maybe it's I think if you're talking about there's the residential amenity space component, which is this private amenity space for residents. That's located on an upper level, and then what we're proposing on the ground floor is what we call a pop space. So it's a privately owned, accessible space. So that's what the Sherbourne Green and the Sherbourne Court is being proposed. So the Sherbourne Court is on the south end, and that's a hardscape, and the Sherbourne Court is the green space. And what's happening with this site is it's actually sloping north to south down. And what that does is it allows us in the parking garage to drop the north part of the site to achieve the soil volumes for the trees that Audrey showed in her design.
And just to tell you, the soil volume requirement is 30 cubic meters of soil per tree, which is a Toronto Green standard, so they'll be required to comply with that.
So then, and also last point on this, Kat, before I go on to Mark next, is that we are going to get into a discussion, or we hope to get into a discussion shortly about the types of public realm features that people would like to see around the building. So if one of your pieces of advice, which it may be implicit in your question, is you'd like them to consider a space for dogs, then we can have that discussion then too. But just so you know, well, we can kind of take your question in that spirit as well, given the COVID and the increased park space use.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for answering the soil volume question. A lot of places tend to have their trees die off. So always good to know.
Perfect. Thanks, Kat. So Mark, I had queued up next. So Mark, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. We'll do maybe 2 or 3 more questions before we jump into the remaining hour of feedback.
Hi, greetings, everyone. I have sort of a quick question, but I didn't see it addressed earlier. You mentioned that much of the space and the actual townhouses, the apartments, would be affordable. And there was one slide that showed a senior on a pension, and then they showed a different set of different employment activities. I'm wondering, are any of the units slated to be RGI units, that being rent geared to income, that kind of thing, which is actually truly affordable? Because the vast majority of the people living just north of here in St. Jamestown, many people in the whole area type of thing are, live on ODSP or other types of support systems and are actually truly low income. So I'm wondering if any of the units will be actually put out on that basis.
So thank you, Mark. And I think there's probably two, we can start with Chantal maybe in terms of the composition of units, because I know that's something Create.to is paying attention to, the different types of composition. And then we do have Valessa and Eric from the Housing Secretariat have joined us as well, so they can jump in to speak a little bit more about RGI, which just for everyone else's benefit is rent geared to income units. You may have said that, Mark, but just in case not. So maybe it's a two-parter answer. So Chantal, we can start with you and then go over to the Housing Secretariat.
Sure, thank you, Ian, and hi, nice to meet you, Mark. So the proposed composition for this site is 50% affordable, which is between 80% AMR to 40% AMR, a minimum of 10% of the affordable units.
Can you say AMR me? Just explain the acronym for everyone. Sorry, Chantal.
Average market rent in Toronto. So it does not include RGI at this point, but I'll let Valessa speak more to that.
So Valessa, I know you're here somewhere. If you just want to unmute yourself. Or Eric.
Hi, it's Eric speaking. Not sure if Valessa's still on the line. She might be doing double duty. I'll just add, I don't know if people caught, but the 10% of the units here are going to be at 40% of average market rent, which is very low. And all the units are, they're not rent geared to income per se, but they are income tested. So the 40% of AMR units are going to go to, quite low income people. And the other thing the city does in terms of improving affordability is provide monthly housing supplements, housing benefits, rent supplements, that sort of thing, to further drive down the rent. So that's not the kind of thing that's been established for this site yet, because it's still early days, but we use whatever resources we have to drive down the rent.
Yeah. Good. So give me a thumbs up, Mark. You okay? You got that? Okay, perfect. Thanks. So I'm just going to keep going to the next few, and then we'll jump into the feedback questions. And of course, if you have other questions, you can let us know too. So Miriam.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Who's? Yes.
Raise my hand, Khadija. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Since the area is a diversity, and and Toronto is diversity, and the area is the most diversity areas, and I live around this area, I cannot see, for the cultural community is going to be included on that, like space for community activity and and kids too. So I cannot see that from the explanation I hear, or also the project I follow. So if you can also clarify that one, because this area is very intensive with cultural diversity or population. So what is the info? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question, and I think it's really, and I'll come to you next, Miriam, because I think we got the queue got a little out of sync there. The question is really about space, if I understood it well, for different kinds of cultural activities or otherwise. So maybe Annalie, I know that you have or know a little bit about the community agency space, which I know is not exactly the same thing, but if you want to kind of respond to the question, then we can go to the next one.
Okay, thanks, Ian. And thanks, Ms. Mahmood. We are definitely aware that when we build tall buildings, we need to build spaces that enable people who live in the units to meet in the building and treat the corridors and common spaces in the building like their front yards and corners to meet and talk to their neighbors. So there are elements of the building where there will be amenity space for the residents of that building. Sunny mentioned that right now we're looking at it above the ground floor, so it really will be a space for people using that building. And then around the outside of the building, safe places for children to meet and maybe practice their scooter or talk to each other. With respect to the community agency space, There is some area that we have set aside right now on Sherbourne Street to accommodate a community agency that is either currently serving the neighborhood or maybe seeking a permanent space in the neighborhood to meet its needs. That may be a targeted group of people that they work with, or it may be something very broad, but it's not something that we have the answer to just yet. But I think you can be assured that the City of Toronto right now is very focused on making sure that when we are approving tall buildings, we are more and more looking at ways that those buildings can be hospitable to families with children, larger and larger households, and understanding that it's not just the unit that people meet in, they meet in all parts of the building.
Thanks, Annalie. So I'm going to say 3 more and then we'll get into the specific discussion questions. So we'll try you again, Miriam. Then I've got someone on the phone with a hand up, and I know Yelena, you've had your hand up for a bit as well. So we'll go to you third and then we'll dive into the question. So Miriam, if you wanted to ask your question.
Yes, hi, thanks. So I live at 85 Bleecker, and I am shocked that there's a proposal for a 22-story building when the current bylaw is only for 3 stories. It's for 10 meters. So I guess I want to know how I can protest that. And B, I do want to follow up on what Stephen was saying, Stephen Thomas, about the shadow impact study. I heard somebody say that the shadow impact study was done on Winchester Park, but what about the residents of 85 Bleecker? Because there are residents that are going to be fully in shadow for all days. And I don't believe that that should be right.
Okay, so thank you, Miriam. So a couple questions there. One is, if someone maybe can explain the how and why the city is proposing a 22-story building on an area that has a bylaw for less than that, and then any advice for Miriam on how and where she can. I mean, Miriam, you've shared your protest here, so we'll make sure it's recorded here. But if there's anywhere else that to let you know where to share that, we can do that as well. And then last point would be on the shadow impact study. So we could go to Chantal about that, or and back to Sunny or others if necessary. So Annalie or Tom, maybe do you want to start with the zoning, the bylaw point?
Yeah, sure.
Tom, just before Tom gets into it, I just wanted to note, Miriam, again, definitely come back to the next meeting to see how the project evolves. But before Tom gets into it, City Council has identified this site for a Housing Now site, and the purpose is to find ways to maximize the ability to accommodate affordable housing on site. So what we're trying to do here is come up with a development concept that really addresses all needs and all frontages of the building. I'm not going to take Tom's thunder because he is a very experienced community planner on this, but I did just want to point out that City Council has directed us to approve a development concept for this location for affordable housing.
But why not 4 stories and why 22 stories?
Well, I think it comes down to starting with the land use designation, which is apartment neighborhood. So the official plan, being the vision for the future, has identified these lands as suitable for an apartment building. And it's a good question. I mean, whether it's 22 or 15, it doesn't tell us the answer there. So that's where we look into shadow impact and privacy impact. And when we're looking at shadow and privacy, well, shadow especially, our first concern is impact on the public realm, the streets and the parks. And then second is the impact on the neighbors, the adjacent houses. So that's something we'll be looking at closely through further review. I mean, there is a certain degree of shadow impact which is tolerable, but also there can be an excessive degree. So it's a question of finding a balance within this apartment neighborhood.
And I think Miriam's last question was about how to register her issues with this project in the negative. And so we'll be continuing this discussion, and there's also very formal processes to register your comments through the actual committee where the zoning bylaw will be brought forward. That is the Planning and Housing Committee. If you receive the notice for this meeting, you will receive the official notice about that meeting, which will tell you how to register any comments you may have with the city clerk. And that's when we get into a very formal process. But right now, here at the beginning.
And I would encourage you to send me your comments by email or by phone. The more specific you can be in terms of your concerns, like if it is shadow, that's helpful in terms of knowing exactly what the issue is.
And Chantal, I know I mean, if it's already been said, it's been said, but if you wanted to share anything from the Create To perspective as well.
Sure. So Sunny kind of mentioned it at the previous question. We have tested the shadow impact for the 22 stories, including the mechanical penthouse, on the spring summer equinoxes where the shadows are the longest. And I will say that what we've done successfully is to orient the tower such that the net new shadow impact is minimized as much as possible on the residences to the north, and as well as on the sidewalks and the public realm within the area. So there will be a more detailed shadow analysis that will be a part of the zoning bylaw application that you'll be able to see as well.
And will that shadow impact, will we be included? Like, will that go out to all the residents of the buildings that are going to be impacted?
So
So that-
yeah, go ahead.
We can make it as part of our next presentation so that it's absolutely in front of you, and Sunny can walk through it hour by hour for those spring and fall equinoxes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So thanks, Miriam. So I had two more, and I did promise them, so I do want to go to them. So I'm going to go to the person on the phone first. I have to unmute you, so you'll hear a sound, and then you can ask your question. So you should be unmuted, person on the phone.
This is Dick O'Connor for Robert Cooper. We live together in 135 Bleecker. I have two concerns. One is the use of automobiles. We are already so overcrowded at the exit onto Wellesley, and it's a one-way street. We cannot exit onto Carleton. We need a light there very badly. It's an extremely dangerous left turn from Bleecker onto Wellesley. Whereas I know there are a lot of lights along there. The one at Homewood services a much smaller number of people than live on Bleecker, and I'm hoping for a light at the end of the street if we're going to add to. We need it now. If we're going to add, are there more than 4 units per floor in this building you're building?
So I just wanted to make sure, Robert, is that all your questions? Because after I'll have to put you back on mute and then go to the next person. So if I understand you well, you've got some advice about, concerns about parking and some advice about adding a light. And then
getting out of the street. There are so many cars now that I'm worried about getting off or getting out of Bleecker onto Wellesley.
Okay, out of Bleecker onto Wellesley.
Units per floor there are in this 15 or 22 story building.
Perfect. I got you loud and clear, Robert. So maybe I'll go first. I know, Tom, you're on traffic and transportation, and then how many units we can go to Chantal or Annalie.
Yeah, and I mean, as part of the rezoning application, they'll be required to do a traffic impact study. So we'll make sure that they look at the turning movements and the waiting times at the intersection of Bleecker and Wellesley. So yeah, thanks for raising that. We'll be sure to look at that closely.
It's Kristen speaking. It's Councillor Wong-Tam. Perhaps I can also pipe in. The request for a signalized intersection or signalized light at Bleecker and Wellesley need not necessarily wait for the full circulation of this application. It is something that my office can look into if that is a need and a requirement from the community. We did also work on the Homewood and Wellesley signalized lights there, so it's something that doesn't necessarily need a development application to trigger. The one thing I would ask is that if you can just send my office a quick email if you don't mind. I'll plug in my contact information into the chat, and I will have transportation operations staff review it. And if it is warranted, meaning that it meets the criteria, I don't see why we can't begin that work now. So just wanted to put that out there. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. And the chat is not enabled, but if it's okay with you, Councillor, we'll put your contact details into the summary of this meeting, which we'll share with with the participants here as well.
Hey, thank you, Ian. Wonderful.
Perfect. And I do want to get back to the last question, Chantal, which is how many units per floor, if we have an idea of that at this point.
Sure. So as part of the preliminary concept that we've shown you today, the podium contains about 15 units, and then the tower component contains 10 units per floor. But this is all obviously going to be, finalized by the the development partner that is brought on through the market offering process.
Right. Thanks, Chantal. So I'm going to go to, I had Yelena queued up, and then I'll pause, remind everybody of the feedback questions that we were hoping to hear from you. I mean, we can keep, it's your meeting as much as it is ours. So if you have questions or other pieces of advice you want to share, we'll do that. But we don't want to lose the opportunity to get your advice on some specific things as well. So Yelena, this is the last one. Over to you. I've unmuted you, and you can ask your question or share your advice.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Wonderful. So yeah, I agree with Miriam, and that was one of my first points that I wanted to get across, the idea that, okay, park, yeah, is obviously important space along with right-of-ways and things like that, but there's also, yeah, the properties that are going to be affected as well. So I'm just dittoing that.
Okay.
Then so I have one comment and one question. I'll start with the question, I guess. I'm curious for the development. I don't know when it was, brought through and whatever else, but for energy use, I'm wondering what targets. I don't know what green standard it would be that would apply when it comes to this development, or if it would. I don't know how long ago it was processed, type of thing. So that's my question. My other comment would be for the private public space that is to the north side, that's kind of adjacent to what would be, I'm assuming, like the entrance area to what would be the lower garage parking area. I just think it's kind of a shame to put space to the north of that side. First of all, when it comes to sun, but second of all, when it comes to vehicular, traffic along that area, I would prefer, and I also caveat here, I studied planning, but I don't practice planning. But for me, I prefer the additional space to the south, having even more space to the south of the tower. And I agree with Miriam, it's kind of a shame that, and this is a general Toronto thing, that, we have these high towers, and I appreciate that we need affordable housing, but just to see in this context, it's, the rest of the surrounding areas aren't there yet in terms of density. But so those are my question and comment.
Okay, thanks a lot, Yelena. So we've got your comments right down. So maybe I'll just jump to your question, which was about energy use and kind of which standard, environmental standard. So Chantal, I can start with you, and then over to city planning to supplement.
Sure. So right now we are targeting for TGS version 3 tier 4 for this Housing Now site, and so that is the closest to net zero. It is not net zero, but it is the closest to net zero.
Right. And TGS is the Toronto Green Standard.
Yes, sorry with my acronyms, Ian. Yeah, TGS okay. Is the Toronto Green Standard.
Oh, that's good.
Was there anything else, either Tom or Annalie, to add to that? Or are you okay with Chantal? Yeah. Okay. Good. So I'm going to pause. I see lots of hands up, which is great. So I'm not going to pause for long. But I do want to just remind everybody of the questions that we did want to ask your advice on, and we've heard some of it already, but I just want to put them in front of everyone one more time. So the questions that we're looking to get your advice on are, and we just heard some of it from Yelena, what types of public realm features would you like to see around the building? So we heard something earlier on about dog run or space for dogs, and also just a suggestion now to consider shifting the allocation of that space so that there's more on the south side. So that kind of feedback is super helpful, and anything along those lines that others want to share, that's great. We also did want to get your advice on how to best reflect the characteristics of the neighborhood and the surrounding building. So again, I think one of the first comments, I think was from Stephen, was about that, exactly that, the color of the bricks and the kind of the way that a building on Beverly landed. Didn't love that example, so it was more of a avoid that. But we were keen to have more of that kind of discussion, and as well, the types of community agency space that you think would benefit the local community. And we heard a little bit about that from a kind of a arts and cultural perspective earlier on as well. So those are the three questions for feedback that we were looking to get advice on. I'll go back to the questions list now, and just if that provoked anything from any of you, then please let me know. So I'm going to go back to my queue. First up, I've got Marianne. So Marianne, if you just want to unmute yourself and ask your question or share your feedback.
Hi, good evening. I just have a quick question in regards to the housing part. how do you avail the housing proposed in the Sherburne? Is there like a wait list?
Right. So, what's the process for getting into the housing? This is probably a good question for the Housing Secretariat, Eric. If you're here still, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and just answering that one.
Sure. Hi, great question. It's a little bit early, but the city is definitely going to be sort of controlling access to the affordable housing units, and it'll be working primarily off the centralized waiting list. The incomes that are being targeted for the affordable units sort of align with that waiting list. So that's how the process is being run. As you saw in the presentation, it'll be a few years before this building's ready for occupancy, and we are expecting a lot of changes to how the city runs its waiting list over those years. But stay tuned, and yeah, definitely, stay in touch, and we'll be communicating how people get access to these units, as well as all the other affordable housing that's getting built across the city.
Great, thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
No problem. And so it's not a huge deal, but for those that have asked a question, if you lower your hand after you ask your question, then that means that I will, if it goes back up, I will know that you're asking a second question, because if I see your hand hanging out there, I might just think that you forgot to lift it up, put it down. It might not. I'm going to try to go to people that haven't gone before. So just to let you know that about that process. So I've got Adrian D. I'll cue you two up first, and then I'll go to someone on the phone. So Adrian, if you want to unmute yourself and let us know your question or your feedback.
Hi there. Thanks very much for the presentation. We live on Bleecker Street, and I just wanted to ask a question in relation to the determination about, or the decision to make it an affordable rental property as opposed to affordable housing. I just wanted to understand that process a little bit better. And then perhaps just flag very quickly some feedback from our end here. We would echo preliminary concerns about the height of this building. Certainly, looking at the context, it looks like 15 would be on the high end. So just flagging that, and we do have a great interest in understanding the light impacts to the homes on Bleecker Street, as well as wind. I know that wind is the thing that can happen, so that would be good to know and see. Traffic on the street as well. We're sort of surprised to see that the property proposes a throughway from Sherburne to Bleecker. Bleecker is it's very narrow, and people tend to come racing up there. It's quite dangerous at times, so I would sort of flag that as an issue. And also perhaps later on we'll get into the comments about the public realm, but also would sort of want to see some further analysis and thinking about 2 throughways as opposed to 1. It seems to me that it would be interesting to have a wider promenade as opposed to a very small space on the south end, which could potentially be, in complete darkness once the properties south of 405 get redeveloped, which seems imminent as well.
But I guess what we were thinking is a bit the opposite of what Elena suggested early on. When we were brainstorming about the best look for this project, we were thinking of a wider path on the north end. Now, we don't know, we don't have all the information and shade study and all that, but to us, it suggested that there may be more space there for their already existing trees. And when we're thinking of the project, I think it's be good for to think about the likely developments that are going to happen south of the building. So there are some abandoned buildings right now, which I assume will be developed soon. And so I think it makes sense to take that into account.
Okay, that was lots there, and that last point is it's great to have all of your feedback, but especially that one about the public realm. And it's also one of the reasons that we have these public meetings is because sometimes there are a range of opinions that come out. So some people say south side, some people say north side, and so that's something for this team, and I know SVN in particular, and Audrey and Sunny, to think about is what is the rationale for why you would go on one side or another, and take those kinds of things into consideration. So I'm only flagging that as it's always helpful to hear a range of perspectives on any one idea, because I think it helps the team explain their thinking and refine it for the next round. But you did have, so my editorializing aside, you did have a question right off the top, which was, what was the rationale for the decision to make it affordable rental versus ownership? So maybe Chantal will go to you for that. And then Eric, if there's anything to chime in from the Secretariat perspective, that'd be great.
Hi, Adrian. Nice to meet you. So the decision was a council direction from this May 2020. That was part of the approval of the site as one of the phase 2 Housing Now sites.
Great. Yeah. So as a council decision is the quick answer for you there.
Yes.
Perfect. And everything else I think you shared, Adrian, was more advice. We'll just take that in that spirit for the consideration for the concept. So I'm going to go to the next.
I just wanted to point out on that last point about the one wider walkway at the north instead of the south. That's actually a question we'll be posing to the design review panel on Thursday. So you might want to tune in to hear what they have to say about that idea.
We will. Thank you.
And when is that, the review panel discussion?
It's Thursday, but actually, where the design review panel is still migrating from its in-person format, which was a publicly easily accessible format, to a format that is a recorded session that you can request to view after the event, and city planning can provide you with that recording if you wish. So it's something that you can reach out to Tom for the access to that link once it becomes available.
Very well. If you can bring that issue forward and have a discussion about it, we'd appreciate it. Yeah.
It's one of the key questions. So you've kind of hit the nail on the head about some questions we have about the site.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Hit the nail on the head with that one. So I'll go next to Dee. Dee, if you want to unmute yourself and either ask a question or share your advice. Yeah, I'll do the microphone for you, Dee, just in case you're having some trouble. You're unmuted now.
All right. I heard that Toronto Community Housing Corporation was involved in this, that they had others in the buildings. Is true?
No, Dee, that's not the case. This is Housing Now sites are developed through a different way. So it is through Create TO working with the City of Toronto City Planning Division and Housing Secretariat to come up with a zoning that then gets marketed to a developer partner who will build and will be required through a contract with the city to provide the housing at the affordabilities that we've talked about tonight. So it is not a social housing building managed through Toronto Community Housing.
No part of it will be?
No, it will. No, no part of it will be operated through Toronto Community Housing.
All right, and the second part of my question is why in such a concentrated rental area did they decide to drop this building here?
Right, so the question, go ahead. It looks like you're, Annalie or Chantal can jump in on why this site, why did they choose this site?
So Dee, I think that is a very good question. And yes, there are a lot of tall buildings, a lot of apartment buildings in the area. But as we mentioned, I don't know if you caught the beginning of the presentation, but Housing Now is a citywide initiative with over 17 properties across the city of Toronto. The 405 Sherbourne is actually one of the smaller developments through Housing Now. And what we look for when deciding on which sites would be advanced for Housing Now program are city-owned sites that are accessible to transit or are in are easily accessible to transit that can support new development. So a surface parking lot in the downtown would be one of the examples of a site that can support new development in an area that has amenities that people living in rental housing could avail themselves of.
So Dee, if that answered your question, I've got a bunch more hands up that I'd like to get to, but I want to make sure that you've.
Yes, I do have some doubts about the amenities in that particular area and their accessibility, but that's all right. Go ahead.
Okay, well, we'll take that down as well, and if we have time to come back to you to elaborate on those as well, we can do that too.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
Yes.
Ian,
Yes, Councillor. Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't see you, Councillor.
No, it's not a problem. I just wanted to sort of lean into the question that Dee has just asked, as well as Adrian, with respect to the perhaps why not home ownership and why not affordable home ownership and why rental. And I think it's a very legitimate point. The city, as you know, has experienced quite the housing boom. Not necessarily all the housing is diverse. Oftentimes we're seeing a lot of condominiums being built, and even in this particular patch of the city, it's no different. What we haven't seen is the diversity of housing, which means more family-friendly units, more affordable rentals. This particular project is mixed income as well as mixed use, which I think it's important to note. And the proponent developer, whoever it may be, may actually be a nonprofit developer. It could be a cooperative style housing operator at the end of the day. So for those who know Bleecker Street, obviously there's a real history of cooperative housing in the area. And right now, what we don't know is who is the ultimate developer and operator. And so if you want to think about what we haven't a lot of in the city is this type of housing, which is mixed income, mixed use, truly a blend of just about everybody who gets to live here. And that's something that we're trying to fill that gap in along the city. So hopefully that helps answer the question a little bit. And still, it's still early days, so we actually don't know who the actual operator will be. But for sure, it won't be Toronto Community Housing. This is not their land. They have many other revitalizations projects that they are working on, but this is not one of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm going to go to someone on the phone because they've been waiting patiently. So I'm just going to unmute you. You'll hear a little beep. And as soon as you hear that beep, you can either ask your question or share your feedback.
Hello, my name is Rahul Kamtam. Are there any units for sale?
Will there be any units for sale? Chantel, what's the any ownership units in this building?
No, right now we are proposing 100% rental, and 50% of those would be affordable rental, and the remaining 50 would be market rental.
Okay, and you said something about ODSP. Is it confirmed that they have 40% of the rent?
I think
10% would be for the ODSP or something like that, right?
I think, sir, that the point you may have picked up on was the requirement for the fully accessible common spaces and a portion of the units to be fully accessible for people using mobility devices or otherwise.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good, so I'm going to queue up the next few. Mark Richardson, I'm only saying your last name because there's a couple of Marks here. So I'll go to Mark and then Remo and then Joshua. Mark, over to you.
So I used to be a Cabbagetown resident. Years ago, I lived at Sackville and Carlton in a $600 a month basement apartment, and you don't find those anymore. We need affordable housing in Toronto. Totally supportive of this proposal. Because you're looking for it to be a not-for-profit developer and because of where it's located, mid-block, Sherbourne Street with a bike lane on one side and Bleecker on the other side, it's going to be a tough place to build in. It's going to be an expensive place to build in. And you're going to have to maximize the density on that above the 22 stories that you're currently proposing. You probably need to go to 25, 27 stories to make the math work for an affordable housing developer. The folks, our volunteers at Housing Now TO have tweeted out a bunch of stuff today, including a shadow study at the 22, 25, and 27 heights. It's all public, it's all consumable. You know, those great co-ops on Bleecker were all, if you look at that map of the Heritage Conservation District, there's a big U in the middle because we purposely cut out back in 2007 all of those co-ops so they'd be able to expand. For some reason, we forgot to exclude that parking lot. So this is the challenge. If we want to deliver affordable housing in Toronto in 2020 with 2020 construction costs, you guys have got to look at going taller if you want it to be 50-50 and a not-for-profit operator. If you want to go 30-30-30 where there's some condos in there, then the condos can help offset that cost. But right now at 22, you really need to get yourself into 250, 260 units to make a 50-50 mix work in that location. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mark. And that's another a different but similar example of what I was saying earlier with the range of opinions, because there are some folks who are thinking it's too tall, and then others who think it should be taller. So it's exactly the kind of feedback that we're looking to have because I think it will help.
And thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
I just want to point out that we do have Kristen Flood on the phone from Heritage Services, and just to note that, of course, it is a U-shaped Heritage Conservation District, but we'll note that the properties between Bleecker and Sherbourne are more akin to the contributing properties that would go into a Heritage Conservation District than those 1970s co-ops that exist there today. So there is a U-shape, absolutely. I just wanted to point out that the Heritage Conservation District has specific policies related to how to contemplate and work with the opportunity for new development on a parking lot.
Right. I don't know, Kristen, did you want to add to that, or did Annalie cover it okay?
And I think that covered it fairly well. But we do take into account the surrounding context, which includes a great diversity of different buildings. So we're looking at both the contributing heritage buildings and then the later buildings that might not be within the district, but are nearby.
I appreciate that was one of several points that you made there, Mark, as well, in terms of your suggestions around making the economics work either through height or changes in building composition. So we've got that all down as advice as well for the team. If you're okay, Mark, I want to jump to the next person. We can come back to you. Okay, great. So Remo, I had you queued up next if you want to unmute yourself, or Remo, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that.
Yeah, second option. Do you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So Remo here. I'm just gonna go back to the call for recommendations for the public space, and I have another point after that too. So regarding the park, I was gonna suggest maybe if we could have an outdoor gym there or calisthenics gym, because especially this summer with the pandemic, those have been really popular. Like there's one at Riverdale. So having one here too would be my suggestion if I guess community likes that too. And my other point actually kind of goes back to what someone else here said regarding Bleecker and Wellesley and how there's a lot of traffic there. Yeah, because really, I guess now it's a bit better because of more work from home, but when things do go back to normal, that intersection really is pretty crowded. And even if you're taking the bus, it's just going along all the way from Parliament to Wellesley, just going really slowly. So I was wondering if a solution to that would be making that throughway through the property one way, so that you can't go from the new property up Bleecker. So the only exit would be onto Sherbourne, because we know that currently that's how the Greenpeace space works, and there aren't really any traffic issues there. So would that be something that's possible to consider, or would that help at all?
Okay, so it's kind of maybe a combo question. Tom, I know there's some local traffic and transportation questions in there, but also maybe for Audrey and Sunny, just thinking about the design of the site and circulation, is that maybe a piece of advice to consider having it operate like the Green Pea operates. So maybe I'll go to you first, Tom, and then Audrey or Sunny, if there's anything you wanted to add. Oh, you're muted, Tom.
I would just say we'll be looking closely at the traffic impact study in terms of volumes and turning movements.
Okay, and Audrey?
Yeah, we early on we studied sort of as far as we could take it, in terms of circulation and one-way and two-way, and it's just one of those things where, yeah, as we engage the traffic consultant more and more, we'll look at it more closely.
Great. I was just going to add, good to point out that, yeah, we've done the preliminary design without the traffic consultant. So when they come on, they'll actually bring on their expertise and review a lot of these issues and fine tune the design.
Okay.
Just popped in my head right now. I was wondering if making it one way would also increase the space available for the park for humans and the dogs. Yeah, though. Yeah, I can tell you the traffic consultants they'll definitely find there's going to be a lot of traffic at the intersection. So
Right.
yeah, we'll see what the results are.
Okay, great. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
And Ramo, can I just point out that at our next public meeting, which will be in 2021, we'll have some analysis to share with you. We've heard this now from a couple of participants, so we know this is something that people care about, and we'll have some information that can provide more analysis on this point.
Looking forward to that.
Right. Okay, thanks, Ramo. I did have Joshua queued up, but I see the hand has gone down, so we may have lost Joshua. Oh no, there you are. Joshua, go ahead and unmute yourself if you still have your question or feedback.
Yeah. It's Joshua Bernard from Habitat for Humanity, GTA. I just wanted to echo Mark's comments, and it is disappointing, a number of these Housing Now sites. First of all, Housing Now program is great. I know it's a balance for existing communities to drop a ton of density in, but that is living in a big city like Toronto in North America, and that's just part of life. But obviously it's a balance, and there's things that are going to bump up against each other. I will say though that having just straight rental, and I come from a rental background. I live in rental. I rent. I don't own. Even though I work for Habitat, it's disappointing to see that there's not more affordable home ownership opportunities, especially because it is part of the city's 10 years plan, or at least it was. So I'd certainly like to see, versus market units, where we're just trying to get the additional value out of the land, where we're trying to provide kind of long-term opportunities for residents to build equity and security of tenure.
Okay, thanks, Joshua. I don't think there's no question unless Anna wants to respond.
I'll just thank you for that point, Joshua. And I just wanted to pick up on the last comment you mentioned about security of tenure. I think what's key here is that we, through Housing Now, are approving projects that will create thousands of new units across the city of new market rental housing, which is purpose-built rental housing. So, as a contrast to people who may be renting in the private market from people who own condominiums or apartments within people's own homes, we are creating purpose-built market rental, which isn't the same thing as ownership, but does provide the protections that come with that.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, just a quick response to that. Has 50 Wilson Heights been announced yet? Who the winning proponent was?
Sorry, Annalie, go ahead.
Actually, I think we have maybe someone else from Create TO who's on the call who may be able to speak to that.
Yeah,
unless you don't need to have that information.
My point is until we know who the successful proponent was, personally, as a taxpayer and also an affordable housing advocate, I'm holding my breath to wait and confirm that that what you just said will be true. Because at the end of the day, if it's private capital that's driving this, then and there's not a strong presence within the affordable housing sector that's behind these units, it is concerning. But I don't take that as like, I think the city's doing a fantastic job. It's hard to do this new initiative, but I just there's going to be lessons learned.
I just want to answer the question that you asked, Joshua, about 50 Wilson Heights, and the answer is no to that. It has not been announced yet.
Okay. Okay. So lots of strong advice there, Joshua. So thank you for that. I'm going to. We have about 10 minutes left, or just over 10 minutes left, before we go to to talk about the next steps. And I've got a couple more people queued up. We've heard lots of advice about, I think now, about public realm and about fitting into the existing environment. We've heard a little less about agency space, what types of agency space uses people might want to see in the development. So just a reminder, that could be things like libraries, community health services, employment centers, senior services, stuff like that. So if nobody has any suggestions along those lines, that's fine, of course. But if you, in the next couple of questions, if the people queued up have any thoughts to share through that lens specifically, we'd love to hear it. So I'm going to go to Arash and then someone on the phone. So Arash, I've unmuted you, and you can ask your question or share your feedback.
Thank you. I actually was going to ask about the ground floor space on the Sherbourne side. Just because there are going to be public spaces on both the north and south side of the building, and we know that foot traffic generally correlates with lower crime rates. I'm just wondering what consideration is being given to not just kind of putting something there that's kind of tokenistically beneficial to the community, but something in that space that is going to keep a consistent amount of foot traffic alive in the area to kind of afford some level of protection for kind of these relatively secluded walkways, especially considering that on that side of on that part of Sherbourne, you really don't have that many, say, like normal commercial spaces like coffee shops or storefronts that people could usually frequent on a daily basis.
So I'll go to Annalie in a sec for that. But did you have, Arash, it sounds like any suggestions in terms of like you say coffee shop storefronts, or are there other things that you
I don't want to be like partial to specifically commercial spaces, but
okay.
And I'm open to suggestions. But to me, like somewhere people could kind of go to on a daily basis during, I mean, I know you want to be considerate of the fact that there are going to be townhouses on the ground floor, so you can't have, I don't know, drunk people running around, but at the same time, I think the light alone is not going to be enough to protect those public spaces. Some sort of, there has to be some impetus for people to actually kind of go to the neighborhood. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Annalie, any early indications of what that space might be, or?
Well, I think Chantal mentioned it in the presentation that will go through the tenanting process for community agency partners. But actually, I think the material presented by Sunny and Audrey was really compelling about what they've been thinking about with regard to the transparency between the outdoor space and the building itself, and how the design can influence how safe that space feels. So I'll turn it over to our design team.
Yeah, I'll just add that, yeah, one of the things that we're trying to balance here is the porosity of the site and through block connection. Typically in a mid-block building in the city, you would get street wall to street wall. So you'd kind of not have that condition. Sometimes you'd have a parking garage entrance and loading entrance off the main street. So what we're trying to do is really push the building in from the south and from the north to allow that visibility from Sherbourne across to Bleecker, and then try to animate the frontages as much as possible. Of course, it's tricky with typical residential buildings because there's only so much program you can have, especially if you don't have commercial, as you pointed out, to make the streets animated. But having the community space on the street, I think it's there's a mix and a collection of houses, commercial buildings on Sherbourne Street itself. I'm not too familiar if there's any issues with safety around those particular buildings. And Bleecker Street, of course, already has townhomes quite close to the sidewalk. So we're really just trying to mimic the kind of existing prevailing condition.
Okay, but I got your feedback within there, Arash.
So Ian, I have to draw Arash's attention to our on-site video that we filmed that's on the Create.to website. And something that Tom pointed out as we stood there is how popular this site is for people to cross the site. And taking that away, building out lot line to lot line, I think would be really perceived as something that limited mobility in the area, especially pedestrian and cyclist mobility. So we're very aware of that. If you live in the area, you know that's a block that people cross to and fro all the time. So I think, the task for Sunny and Audrey and the people who follow them is to come up with a design that makes that feel comfortable and enables people to continue to access a mid-block connection along what is really a very long block between Wellesley and Carleton.
Great, thanks Annalie for that. So I'm going to jump to someone on the phone. We've got a couple more minutes. I'm going to try to get to at least 2 or 3 more people. So I've unmuted you, person on the phone, can't see your name.
Enid, is Enid?
Yep, go ahead.
Hi, okay. I actually don't have any of the plans in front of me. I didn't receive them. I'm a long-term resident on Bleecker Street. My main concern, And from what I understand, you are going to have some frontage on Bleecker Street, but the planners must be aware that Bleecker Street has been the rear end of a lot of buildings. And I've spent and my main concern is solid waste containment and solid waste disposal and pickup. So I'm wondering, I'm hearing that the traffic is going to be opening on Bleecker Street. So I'm assuming that garbage pickup, recycling pickup is going to be on Bleecker Street. As I said, I spent many years, consulting with property management at City of Toronto to have landlords who are less than responsible in their waste disposal. So many properties, I'm going to say 5 or 6, use Bleecker Street as their garbage instead of on the front on Sherbourne. And I've never quite understood why Bleecker Street has to be the garbage disposal pickup street rather than Sherbourne. And if you're going to maintain that kind of, are you going to maintain that? Because really, the noise in the canyon of Bleecker is problematic with garbage trucks and delivery trucks. And the noise would probably disperse better on Sherbourne where there's a wider area for it to do so. So can you answer any questions about solid waste containment and pickup?
Good. So maybe Sunny, this is already you for not just in terms of the design. How are you thinking about that from a design perspective, and then city planning, Tom or Annalie, if there's anything to add.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the city requires in a building like this for the garbage loading to be in an enclosed space. So that's what we've designed for. So the actual garbage truck would enter into that vehicle through block connection and go into an enclosed room, the door of which would close, and then the garbage maneuvering, which is quite loud, would be contained within that space. So it's really the garbage collection is centrally stored within the building, and then the collection is done in an enclosed space to limit the impact on the adjacent community.
Okay.
Tom or Annalie, anything to add to that? I mean, I know that you all, person also spoke about not wanting to kind of back onto Bleecker Street. I know that was part of in terms of solid waste operations, but anything else to add?
I think Sunny answered well. I would just point out that, we try to activate all frontages. We don't really want to create a back of a building. We want to have 2 fronts.
Okay, good. So I'm going to if you're okay, person on the phone. Sorry, I didn't catch your name there.
If needed. Yeah, and I would just like to, I would like to reinforce the idea that you really need massive areas for garbage, because everyone is buying and disposing of waste, recycling, whatever, at tenfold time what they did in the past. So I hope you make the space big enough for it.
Okay, good. Thanks. Yep. Thank you for that. So I'm going to go next to, and probably last to, Anthony. So Anthony, I'm going to unmute you, and it's over to you.
Hey, thank you so much. So I mostly just want to reiterate that Mark and Joshua's points about affordability and context in the area. So I know that Mark had mentioned that some of the math doesn't work out potentially as a not-for-profit operation. And I know that just up the street at Wellesley and Sherbourne, I think the Altera development on the southwest side is at 36 stories. So, as a neighbor, I would support additional stories if there was affordability that worked as a part of that. And I also was wondering about the parking ratio. I think at about 0.3 right now, and underground parking can be incredibly expensive to build. I know a lot of the places in downtown, especially those that have high amounts of affordable units, have a pretty low demand on their parking facilities. So I was wondering if there's any additional affordability that could be delivered through reducing that parking requirement.
Okay, we take the advice about reiterating Mark and Joshua's point about affordability. The question about parking ratio is maybe is a combination of Chantal and Tom in terms of how you're thinking about parking supply on the site.
Sure. So you noted the ratio that's being targeted at this point. It's 0.3, and that includes the market, affordable, and visitor lots, and that allows us to build one level of underground parking. So that will be, confirmed once we have our traffic consultant on board, whether or not there's an ability to go lower, and if the area would justify that. And maybe Tom, if you want to add anything else, I'll defer to you.
I just that 0.3 spaces per unit is somewhat typical for tall buildings, although you're right, some are less. But we're cognizant of the parking we're losing here, so we have to be careful about giving up parking in this case as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you okay, Anthony? If got the answer to your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. So I got to almost everybody. I know there are a few hands lingering that we didn't get to, but I think we got to almost everybody. And we're just at time, and we did want to spend a few minutes talking about next steps. So maybe Matthew will just put up a slide briefly that talks about the, for those of you that are still on screen, and for those that are on the phone, I can share some of it. But you can, as I said at the beginning of the discussion, this discussion is not the end of or the only place to share feedback. The councillor mentioned it, Chantal, Annalie, Tom, others mentioned it over the course of the discussion. There are lots of ways to share your input. So you can send either an email or either email or phone. Tom, who has spoken quite a bit over the night, so you should know who he is by now, but he's the senior planner. His email address, I'll say it once for those that are on the phone. It's Thomas, THOMAS.Rees, REES, @toronto.ca. And his phone number is 416-392-1791. All this and more you can also find on the project website, which is createto.ca/405 Sherbourne. So you'll find all kinds of contact information, a feedback form, project information, everything you could want to know in order to learn as much about the site as you want and to share your advice. So that's some of the follow-up next steps. I'll just say for our part as a facilitation team, so we've been taking lots of notes, both me and a couple folks from my team have been taking lots of notes over the course of the discussion. And we will be preparing a draft summary of the feedback and the responses. So it's our best effort to synthesize this discussion and organize it. And we'll share it with everybody that shared an email address with us when they logged in draft, to make sure that we didn't mischaracterize or misattribute any of your comments. We're not going to say any, we're not going to attribute comments to people, but we will try to aggregate it. And if we missed a point or mischaracterized a point, we would love it if you would let us know, just to make sure that we don't then give that summary to Create TO in the city and they go off to the races with a misunderstanding in place. So we'll do that within a couple of weeks of this meeting. So that for me in terms of the next steps. Annalie, I'll turn it over to you, and then of course the councillor for any final words. You can stop maybe sharing the screen. Oh no, or no, we need it up for the slides.
Well, I think you summarized it, Ian, and I think we have 2 minutes left, so I'll pass it over to Councillor Montam.
Thank you very much, Annalie, and thank you, Ian, Thomas, everyone who spoke on behalf of the City of Toronto, the consultant team, and in particular to the residents. I know that you have to give up your evening to sit in a virtual room with all of us, and certainly it's not lost on us that you do it because you care deeply about your community. And I know that the group of city planners as well as the city consultants who are here are also very keenly interested in making sure we get this right. The city has not oftentimes been the lead proponent and developer of unlocking land, and this is something that, as you know, given the headlines of what is happening across this city, but also across the country, residents have been asking the city as well as the province and the federal government to leverage government-owned lands so that we can actually build out a public interest and a public good. And that's exactly what this particular project is about. We haven't seen the architecture, so we haven't seen the actual design of the building, which I think is still very important, because if we don't build something wonderful with a real lasting legacy that is going to inspire, because just because it's a public site, it shouldn't be unattractive. I keep talking about how it really needs to be something that we can all aspire to and look to and say, wow, look, we did this right together. And if it doesn't meet that standard, I really don't know why we would be doing it. And so I want us to really push the envelope, and which is why I was really even thrilled to hear the conflict of feedback, because it just meant that we are going to be able to push and pull each other into making sure that this application responds exactly to what this community is looking for in order for you to accept it. And so thank you for that, and thank you for not holding back. I think that was good, and thank you for everything that you've offered us tonight. And for those who don't know what the design review panel does, is that it's literally a group of experts, urban designers, architects, and they will shred this to bits and pieces. So these folks are going to be in for a bit of a tough run, because there's going to be another group of peer experts that will basically deconstruct everything that they've presented tonight. So there is no way to give this a green light, and it won't get a passing grade until everybody has a say. And so thank you very much, everyone, for your time and participation tonight. It's really valuable. And be safe.
Thank you, thanks a lot, everyone. Appreciate it.